we truly believe in making everybody really hate each other less and hate the corrupt ruling class more.
A few weeks ago, Cenk Uygur had a Twitter thread on a very popular subject in online politics: an alliance between the populist left and the populist right. Cenk wrote, "Social issues are really important and worth fighting over. But maybe the left wing and right wing should consider uniting on economic issues against corporate rule. We agree a lot more than people realize on those issues. Then we can go back to kicking each other's ass. People on the left need to stop assuming that our side would immediately get duped by the right wing into voting for some racist fascist. Sure, be extremely cautious, but what if we tricked them into voting to raise their own wages? Or giving themselves free healthcare? I don't want anyone to think I'm telling them to vote Republican. Their politicians are the worst people on earth, and you don't hold hands with extremist groups, you obviously fight them.
Fight for.
But what if there are right-wing voters who also hate corporate rule and corruption? Shu Head, another leftist internet personality, praised Cenk for finally catching up. Shu herself has since joined an organization called the New York State Populist League, which is dedicated to this sort of populist alliance. What specifically they're for, I couldn't tell from their social media. I just know that they apparently like Huey Long, Ross Perot, and Teddy Roosevelt, and that they don't like Andrew Cuomo. I certainly can't blame them for that last one. The idea of right-wing and left-wing populists teaming up, the Red-Brown Alliance, as some of us like to call it, against the establishment, the corporations, or whatever, is a popular idea in theory, especially online. The show Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar is entirely based on this idea.
What we're trying to do here, we said this in our mission statement, we said this whenever we announced, which is that we truly believe in making everybody really hate each other less and hate the corrupt ruling class more.
Even when people don't talk in explicitly partisan terms, populist rhetoric of this kind does pretty well on the internet. Do you remember the rant that Charles Barkley went on that made him the hero of Twitter for a few days? When I used the actual clip, I was unable to monetize, so I'll just read what Charles Barkley said, and I will spare you my Charles Barkley impression. "Man, I think most white people and black people are great people. I really believe that in my heart. But I think our system is set up where our politicians, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are designed to make us not like each other, so they can keep their grasp of money and power. They divide and conquer." Rather predictably, Kyle Kulinski responded favorably.
He has a better understanding of politics than, I would argue, most politicians, and certainly any of the media figures on mainstream media, who really are airheads and have no idea what the hell they're talking about the overwhelming majority of the time, and they're just robots who spew establishment talking points. And yes, those elite interests want nothing more than for the racial tensions to be stoked, and for the partisan tribal tensions to be stoked, because as long as we're fighting each other, as long as you think your fellow American is the problem, you don't realize who the real problem is. And it's the corrupt elite that bought and owned the government and rigged the rules in their favor and against average people.
Unpredictably, at least for me, his friend the Amazing Atheist didn't.
Like, you don't need, it's not a, like, there's not a lot of work involved in dividing people, okay? Like, people butt heads really easily. And, like, the more in my life I have tried to organize various people into different configurations, whether it be family structure or business structure or what have you, you see that, like, egos clash, perspectives come into conflict, opinions differ in drastically different ways, and those sorts of things have to be resolved. And when you apply that to something the size of a country, like the idea that the reason there are disagreements between people in this country is because politicians, like, created them as some sort of, like, mind control construct is absurd. I don't know, Kyle, you might need a vacation or something. I think you've either that or this is just like basketball fanboyism, like maybe like some sort of like lowered expectation as far as Charles Barkley goes, or like maybe because you watch his show, you understand him in a broader context than I do or something. But like, this is just like such a weirdly remedial, simple take on this issue
And TJ is right. This isn't to say that there aren't political carnival barkers who seek to whip people up for various purposes. There certainly are. But I would argue that they are exploiting pre-existing rifts between people, not creating new ones. As much as people love this idea of everyone banding together against the elites, or working across ideological lines to make fundamental changes throughout the country, it's pretty unrealistic because people have significantly different morals and visions for the country. I would never say that it's impossible. I know better than to categorically dismiss anything in American politics. But there are some serious hurdles in the way that I don't think will go away anytime soon. Don't get me wrong, it's not that people of different ideological persuasions can never work together on anything. About a year ago, Glenn Greenwald laid out some potentially fertile ground for cooperation between these two sides.
Oftentimes, left-wing populist politicians work directly with right-wing populists in order to implement that agenda. Bernie Sanders, for example, when he wanted to limit the bombing campaign that started under the Obama administration and continued under the Trump administration, worked with a Tea Party Republican in the Senate, Mike Lee, to co-sponsor legislation to curb executive power and the ability for Trump to continue to bomb Yemen in partnership with the Saudis. When Dennis Kucinich wanted to curb corporatism and audit the Fed, bring transparency to this extremely powerful yet opaque institution, he worked with Ron Paul. When Cory Booker tries to do criminal justice reform, radical criminal justice reform, ending the drug war, ending harsh mandatory minimum sentences, he works with Rand Paul. When leftist think tank monopoly experts who work against monopoly power in Washington want to find allies to help them stand against the monopoly power of tech companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon, one of their most reliable and vocal allies is not a Democratic senator. It is the far-right Republican senator who unseated Claire McCaskill in the Missouri race in 2018, the Republican senator Josh Hawley. You can see over and over critical areas where left-wing populists find common ground, not with Democratic establishment figures who oppose their agenda, but with right-wing populists, as I just defined it.
I don't think most of that is ridiculous or beyond the pale. Quite the opposite. If anything, it's a little too superficial, given what the respective endgames for both sides are. It's true that left-wing and right-wing populists have overlapping enemies lists, and they do share some agenda items, and that this could facilitate cooperation. As I'll argue, however, the deeper, more fundamental reform, the sort of which the online commentariat clamors for, whether you're talking about the left or the right, is significantly less likely to happen. This is not merely due to the magnitude of these projects compared to, say, legalizing marijuana, though that is certainly an obstacle as well, but because the people involved that need to work together have significantly different values. One of the most informative books written about politics is Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind. The central narrative of the book is based off of moral foundations theory. Moral foundations theory states that there are substantial variations in human morality which dictate not only how we make decisions, but also go a long way in determining our politics. You can actually take the test that the creators of moral foundations theory put together to see where it charts you politically. The link to it is in the description box below. The test asks your feelings about hypothetical situations like Hannah inherited an old flag of her country from her father, but has never used it. One day when Hannah is cleaning the house, she discovers that she is out of rags, so she uses the flag as a rag to clean the house. And Tim asks his father for permission to stay out late because his classmates are throwing a party. When his father refuses, Tim slams the door in his face. At first glance, these questions don't seem to have anything to do with politics. I'm sure that if certain internet policy wonks saw this, they'd ask, where are the questions about Medicare for All and the Green New Deal? The thing is, most people don't approach politics at that level. What these hypothetical situations attempt to elucidate is what people's values are. Haidt divides morality into 6 different categories: care, harm, fairness, cheating, loyalty, betrayal, authority, subversion, purity, degradation, and liberty, oppression. The Moral Foundations questionnaire scores to what extent people prioritize these different categories based on how they react to the hypothetical scenarios. The idea behind moral foundations theory is that people approach politics not as an exercise in accounting of policy positions, but through these moral impulses. On average, progressives focus primarily on the care harm, liberty oppression, and fairness cheating matrices. Conservatives, on average, are pretty evenly balanced across the board, and libertarians, unsurprisingly, focus primarily on the liberty-oppression matrix. This is all profoundly interesting work in its own right, and I believe that it tells us far more about politics than opinion polls do. But to bring us back to the topic of populism, let's take another look at Cenk's Twitter thread. In the very first sentence, Cenk concedes that left-wing populists and right-wing populists disagree on social issues. First of all, social issues is a bit of a canard in its own right, but that's a different topic for a different day. Second, if we assume that moral foundations theory is correct, progressives and conservatives aren't simply just checking different boxes on a list of questions here. The differences between the left and the right on issues like abortion, gay marriage, gambling, gun control, or whatever you want to define as a social issue, reflect more fundamental differences in values that will manifest themselves in other areas, including on issues where there is supposed agreement. Another interesting book that is in some ways based off of Haidt's work is Arnold Kling's The Three Languages of Politics. While Kling has his disagreements with Haidt, I view his book in some ways as a practical application of Haidt's work. In particular, Kling argues that these differences in our values manifest themselves in the way we talk about politics. As Kling writes, I believe that for politically engaged Americans today, ideology has become a powerful marker of identity. Progressives, conservatives, and libertarians are now rivalrous, hostile tribes. As such, they have developed linguistic differences and negative stereotypes of one another, which the three-axis model can help articulate. Within a tribe, political language is used to reassure others of one's loyalty to the tribe, to lift one's status within the tribe, and whip up hostility against other tribes. The three-axis model Kling presents are language heuristics that different ideologues use. As Kling writes, the first dominant heuristic is one I associate with progressives. Progressives are most comfortable with language that frames political issues in terms of oppressors and oppressed. The second dominant heuristic is one I associate with conservatives. Conservatives are most comfortable with language that frames political issues in terms of civilization and barbarism. This is exactly how these respective sides talk about immigration. Here's what Kyle says about anti-immigrant sentiment on the right.
It appears like the system is designed to keep everybody at each other's throats and always disagreeing, because as long as the regular people are fighting amongst each other, the wealthy run out the back door with all the money and all the power and all the influence and all the control and all of the levers of success in a society.
Kyle thinks that elites have tricked regular people into fighting amongst each other so that they may benefit from the conflict. This is the oppressor versus oppressed axis. Now, let's listen to what former President Donald Trump said about immigrants from Latin America when he first announced his candidacy.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards, and they tell us what we're getting. And it only makes common sense. It only makes common sense. They're sending us not the right people. It's coming from more than Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin America, and it's coming probably from the Middle East.
These immigrants are from backward places, and if they continue to flood the country unabated, they will pose great harm to us and our civilization. This is the civilization versus barbarism axis in action. Even when the positions on immigration are switched, the people involved still talk about this issue in these respective rhetorical styles. Consider what Bernie Sanders said of immigration back in 2015. Ezra Klein asked him about sharply increasing immigration, even up to the point of open borders. And Sanders said this.
Open borders?
Open
borders. That's a Koch brothers proposal. The
Really?
idea, of course. I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But
That
it would make a lot of the
me.
global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that. If you believe in a nation state, or in a country called the United States, or UK, or Denmark, or any other country, you have an obligation, in my view, to do everything we can to help poor people. What right-wing people in this country would love is an open border policy. Bring in all kinds of people who work for $2 or $3 an hour. That would be great for them. I don't believe in that.
Sanders never embraced open borders. Very few people genuinely do. But he did relax his immigration stance just a few months later because he was seeking the Democratic nomination. Notice the way he framed this issue, though. Even though Bernie was more bearish on immigration at this point, he still framed the issue as oppressor versus the oppressed. The evil Koch brothers were plotting to have hordes of poor people come into the country so that they could exploit the cheap labor to further enrich themselves. On the other side, it's worth noting that Donald Trump was never categorically against immigration. You may remember back in 2018, Trump allegedly said that he didn't want more immigrants from Haiti or other shithole countries, but would much rather have immigrants from Norway. Assuming that he did actually say this, Donald Trump is framing the issue from the civilization versus barbarism perspective. Immigrants are fine as long as they come from a civilized country, not a shithole one. At this point, you may be wondering, what does it matter how they got to their position, as long as they want the same end result? Can't both sides just work towards what they agree to be a solution, regardless of why they think the problem they're solving exists in the first place? Well, they certainly can, and they have. But like I said earlier, there's a good reason why this sort of cooperation will likely be limited. You see, both the oppression versus the oppressed matrix and the civilization versus barbarism matrix are about identity. Are we all workers of the world who need to unite instead of living under the boot of the oppressive elites? Or are we the inheritors of civilization who need to defend our way of life from those who would tear it down? These different visions of the world, these different identities, are far more difficult to reconcile than mere issues. The Bernie Sanders type of leftists are offering a vision of the country where the government offers far more than it currently does in benefits, it controls certain industries in ways it currently doesn't, and attempts to promote institutions that the left currently deems to be lacking, like unions and worker-run cooperatives. As much as I think the online left overstates the popularity of their agenda, I do think the conservatives are far more receptive to much of this than some might believe, in particular the increased benefits. The problem is, questions of identity cannot be divorced from the formation of these policies, because whenever you're constructing them, you inevitably run into the question of who should receive the government benefits. It's all well and good to hate the same people, and ostensibly share some of the same goals, but as always, the devil is in the details. Both sides agree that Jeff Bezos has too much money, and that we have a lot of people who can't afford healthcare. So let's just take some of Jeff Bezos' money and pay for people's healthcare. It's that simple, right? Well, who is included in the people who should have their healthcare paid for by the government? Does that group include immigrants? Even illegal immigrants? Most of the Democratic candidates in 2020 thought so.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
They argued that it would be better for the nation as a whole.
Our country is healthier when everybody is healthier.
This is not very popular with the right. The illegals are benefiting from government program X is a common talking point the right employs against government largesse.
There are also those who claim that our reform efforts would ensure illegal immigrants. This too is false. The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally. It's not true.
What about wages? Can leftists trick right-wingers into raising their wages, as Cenk suggests? Well, does anybody really need to be tricked? Most of the right-wing rank and file are for raising the minimum wage. The one question is, raise it on whom? Most people are fine with raising it on big bad businesses like Walmart and Amazon. But what about small businesses? Well, concerning the former, both Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley agree. Walmart and Amazon can afford to stop exploiting workers the way they do. The two senators part company on the question of small businesses, though. Josh Hawley argues that these noble entrepreneurs can't afford to do this, whereas Bernie Sanders believes they have a moral obligation to do so, regardless of how much it costs them. Bernie believes that businesses of any kind are the oppressor, whereas Hawley is only concerned about the evil multinationals that threaten our way of life. What about free trade and protectionism? Well, all populists know that when the neoliberal establishment embraced free trade, it destroyed our manufacturing base and devastated the working class. Hopefully the people who watch this channel know better, but that's neither here nor there. Therefore, we need to bring back manufacturing to this country with protectionist measures like tariffs, subsidies, import quotas, etc. So which industries should we offer protection to? Let's say we want to do it with the auto industry. Again, we already do that, but remember we're entertaining the populist assumption that we actually have free trade in this country. Okay, does that include electric vehicles? Or should we subsidize gas-guzzling SUVs and trucks? Most populists agree that we need energy independence. So how do we go about achieving that? Do we focus on investing in more renewables like leftists want? Or do we expand oil and natural gas drilling like the right wants? I could go on, but hopefully you get the point. With government programs and initiatives like these, you are inevitably prioritizing certain people over others. There is simply no getting around the issue of identity. The disagreements among populists run a lot deeper than social issues. The differences on social issues are merely the capstone of deeper, more fundamental differences in values. It's easy for internet pundits to throw around cheap rhetoric about how we're all actually on the same page, and the elites are simply tricking us into disagreeing with each other. This is a fairy tale. We're going to have to find better ways to live alongside people who have different values than us, because in all likelihood, this isn't going to work.